A decorated war veteran with visible scars gets brutally mocked in a crowded diner by someone from his past, leaving him broken and questioning his worth. But when dozens of Marines show up the next morning in formation outside that same diner, everyone discovers the shocking truth about who is really behind the cruelest words. What happens when two wounded warriors finally face the demons they've been hiding from each other? I pulled my old baseball cap down over my eyes as I walked toward Murphy's diner. My heart was beating fast, like it always did when I had to go somewhere with lots of people. The red and purple scars on my neck felt like they were burning, even though I knew that was just in my head. People always stared at them. Some looked away real quick when I caught them looking. Others just kept staring like I was some kind of circus show. The morning air was cold against my face, but I was sweating anyway. I just wanted to get some coffee and scrambled eggs, then get out of there as fast as I could. That's all I ever wanted these days, to be invisible, to not have to see that look in people's eyes when they saw what the bomb in Afghanistan had done to me. I pushed open the glass door of the diner, and the little bell above it rang out. The smell of bacon and coffee hit me, reminding me of better times when I used to come here with my family. Before everything changed, before I went to war, before I came back looking like this. The diner was pretty full for a Tuesday morning. Construction workers sat at the counter drinking coffee and talking about their jobs. A few old men were reading newspapers and complaining about politics. Some moms with their little kids were eating pancakes in the corner booths. Normal people living normal lives. I found an empty table near the window and sat down with my back to the wall. That's something they taught us in the Army. Always sit where you can see the exits. Always be ready. Even though I wasn't a soldier anymore, some habits never go away. Betty, the waitress who'd been working here since I was a kid, came over with a smile. She never looked at my scars like they were gross or scary. She just treated me like the same Tommy Rodriguez who used to come in here with his mom after church on Sundays. The usual, honey, she asked, pouring coffee into my cup without waiting for an answer. Yes, ma'am, I said quietly. Scrambled eggs and wheat toast. Coming right up, sweetie. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup and tried to make myself smaller in the booth. That's when I heard the loud laughing from across the diner. A group of men in expensive suits were having some kind of business meeting. They had fancy phones and leather folders spread out on their table. Their watches probably cost more than I made in 6 months at my part-time job at the hardware store. One of them looked familiar, but I couldn't place him right away. He had perfect hair and white teeth, like someone from a TV commercial. He was telling some story that was making his friends laugh really hard. Something about making a big sale and getting a bonus. I try not to look at them, but something about that guy kept bugging me. Where had I seen him before? He looked like someone I used to know, but different, older, richer, more confident than anyone I grew up with in my neighborhood. Then he turned his head, and I saw his profile. My stomach dropped like I was falling off a cliff. Jake Martinez. Jake Martinez from Washington High School. Jake Martinez, who used to live 3 blocks away from me. Jake Martinez, who I played basketball with at the community center when we were kids. Jake Martinez, who always said he was going to be rich someday and get out of our crappy neighborhood. I guess he kept his promise. Jake was 2 years younger than me, but he was always talking big. Always had some plan to make money or get famous. The other kids thought he was kind of annoying, but I felt sorry for him. His dad left when he was little, and his mom worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. Maybe that's why he always wanted to prove he was better than everyone else. But looking at him now, in his expensive suit with his fancy friends, I felt something I didn't expect. I felt jealous. Here I was, barely able to make ends meet, afraid to leave my apartment most days, while Jake Martinez was living the dream. He'd made it out. He'd become somebody important. I pulled my cap down lower and hoped he wouldn't notice me. The last thing I wanted was to have to explain what happened to my face. To tell him about the roadside bomb that killed 3 of my friends and left me looking like a monster. To admit that the tough guy from high school who everyone thought would make something of himself was now just a broken-down veteran who couldn't even order food without getting nervous. But luck was never on my side. Jake's eyes moved across the diner, and they stopped right on me. His face changed from confusion to recognition to something that looked almost like disgust. He whispered something to his friends, and they all turned to look at me. My hand started shaking so bad I had to put my coffee cup down. Jake stood up from his table and started walking toward me. His friends were grinning like they were about to watch something really entertaining. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was about to become the worst morning of my life. Well, Jake said as he got closer to my table. His voice was different now, louder and meaner than the kid I remembered. If it isn't Tommy Rodriguez. I looked up at him, hoping maybe he'd just say hello and walk away. But the look in his eyes told me that wasn't going to happen. This wasn't going to be a friendly reunion between old neighbors. "Hey, Jake," I said quietly, hoping to keep this short and simple. But Jake had other plans. He was standing right next to my table now, and his friends had gotten up to watch the show. The whole diner was starting to pay attention to us. "Man, Tommy, what the hell happened to you?" Jake said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You look like you got hit by a truck." I felt my face get hot with embarrassment. The scars on my neck felt like they were glowing. Everyone in the diner was staring now, and I wanted to disappear into the floor. "I was in Afghanistan," I said, barely above a whisper. "Afghanistan." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. "Dude, you look like you stuck your face in a campfire. What happened? You trip over your own feet and fall into an explosion." His friends started laughing too. Betty, who was bringing food to another table, stopped and gave Jake a dirty look. But that didn't stop him. "You know what's really funny?" Jake continued, getting louder. "Remember in high school when you thought you were so tough? You were always talking about joining the army and becoming some kind of hero. Looks like that worked out real well for you." I wanted to tell him about my friends who died, about how I dragged 2 wounded soldiers to safety while my own skin was burning, about the medal they gave me that I keep in a drawer because I don't feel like I deserve it. But the words wouldn't come out. "I remember you used to pick on the smaller kids," Jake went on. "Thought you were the king of the school. Now look at you. You can't even look me in the eye." That wasn't true. I never picked on smaller kids. If anything, I tried to protect them from the real bullies. But Jake was rewriting history to make himself look better, and everyone was believing him. "At least I can still get a decent job," Jake said, adjusting his expensive tie. "I mean, who's going to hire someone who looks like that? You probably scare little kids when they see you at the grocery store." The construction workers at the counter had stopped eating to watch. The moms with their children were trying to get their kids to stop staring. I felt like an animal in a zoo, and Jake was the tour guide pointing out all my worst features. "You want to know the really funny part?" Jake leaned down closer to my face. "While you were over there playing soldier and getting yourself blown up, I was in college getting my business degree. I've got a corner office downtown now. I drive a BMW. I live in one of those fancy condos by the river." He straightened up and spread his arms wide like he was showing off for his friends. "I made something of myself, Tommy. I used my brain instead of my muscles. Guess we know who made the smarter choice, right?" I stood up from the booth, my legs shaky. I just wanted to get out of there. I threw a $20 bill on the table, enough to cover my coffee and Betty's tip. "Where you going, Scarface?" Jake stepped in front of me, blocking my way to the door. "I'm not done catching up with my old friend here." His breath smelled like alcohol, which was weird because it was only 9 in the morning. Maybe he was celebrating some big business deal with his fancy friends. "Come on, Jake," I said, trying to step around him. "Just let me go." "Let you go?" Jake pushed me back a little with his hand on my chest. "Tommy, we haven't seen each other in what, 10 years? I want to hear all about your adventures in the desert. Tell everyone how you became such a war hero." The way he said war hero made it sound like a dirty word, like something to be ashamed of instead of proud of. You know what I think happened? Jake was really warming up now, playing to his audience. "I think you went over there looking for a fight, and you found one. But it didn't work out the way you thought it would, did it? Instead of coming home covered in glory, you came home covered in scars." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, and I hated myself for it. I didn't want to cry in front of all these people. I didn't want to give Jake the satisfaction of seeing me break down. "At least when I die," Jake said, his voice getting even meaner, "people will remember me for building something, for being successful, for making a difference in the world. What are people going to remember you for, Tommy? Being damaged goods?" That's when something inside me snapped. My hands turned into fists so tight that my knuckles went white. For the first time since I got back from Afghanistan, I felt like the old Tommy Rodriguez, the one who never backed down from a fight, the one who protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Jake saw the change in my eyes and took a step back. Maybe he remembered that I used to be stronger than him. Maybe he could see that underneath all the scars and fear, there was still a soldier who knew how to fight. "What's wrong, Tommy?" Jake said, but his voice wasn't as confident as before. "You going to hit me? Right here in front of everyone? That'll really show them what kind of hero you are." I could feel everyone in the diner watching us. The construction workers had turned around on their stools to get a better view. The mothers were covering their children's eyes. Betty was standing by the kitchen door with her hand on her hip, looking like she was ready to call the police. For a second, I imagined what it would feel like to punch Jake right in his perfect white teeth, to wipe that smug smile off his face, to make him feel as small and worthless as he was making me feel. But then I remembered something my drill sergeant used to say back in basic training. A real soldier knows when to fight and when to walk away. The strongest man is the one who can control his anger, not the one who lets his anger control him. I took a deep breath and unclenched my fists. Jake wasn't worth it. Getting in a fight wouldn't change anything. It would just prove to everyone that I really was the damaged, dangerous person they probably thought I was. "You're right, Jake," I said quietly. "You made the smart choice." I pushed past him toward the door, but Jake wasn't done with me yet. He grabbed my arm and spun me around. "That's it," he said. "That's all you got? Man, the Army really did break you, didn't it?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then looked back up at his face. "Let go of me." Something in my voice must have scared him because he dropped his hand real quick. But then he got that mean smile back on his face. "You know what, Tommy? I actually feel sorry for you. Here I am, successful, happy, living the good life. And there you are, all messed up and alone. Do you even have a job? Do you even have any friends? Or do you just sit in your apartment all day feeling sorry for yourself?" Each word hit me like a punch to the stomach because they were all true. I didn't have many friends anymore. The ones from high school had moved on with their lives, and it was hard to make new ones when you look like I did. My job at the hardware store was only part-time, and I barely made enough money to pay rent and buy food. Most days, I'd just sit in my apartment watching TV and try not to think about the war. Try not to see the faces of my dead friends every time I close my eyes. "I've got everything I ever wanted," Jake continued. "And you got nothing. That's gotta hurt, doesn't it?" I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that I had things too. But standing there in that diner, with everyone staring at me like I was some kind of freak show, I couldn't think of a single thing I had that was worth bragging about. "At least people can stand to look at me," Jake said. "At least when I walk into a room, people don't stop eating and stare like they're looking at a car accident." That one hurt the most because it was true. People did stare. They did stop what they were doing when they saw my scars. Little kids pointed at me in the grocery store until their parents pulled their hands down and told them not to stare at the strange man. I felt the tears starting to come again, and this time I couldn't stop them. One rolled down my cheek, right over the biggest scar on the left side of my face. Jake saw it and smiled like he just won prize. "Oh man, are you crying?" he said loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "The big tough soldier is crying like a little baby." That's when Betty had enough. She marched over to our table, carrying a pot of hot coffee, like it was a weapon. "That's enough," she said to Jake. "You need to leave this boy alone and get out of my diner." "It's okay, Betty," I said, wiping the tear off my face. I was just leaving anyway. I walked toward the door as fast as I could without running. Behind me, I could hear Jake laughing and telling his friends how pathetic I was. I could hear the other customers whispering about what they'd just seen. But just as I reached the door, Jake shouted something that stopped me cold. "Hey, Tommy," he called out. "Next time you want to play dress up and pretend to be a hero, make sure you don't get your face blown off." I stood there with my hand on the door handle, shaking all over. Not from anger this time, but from something else. Something that felt like my whole world was falling apart. Because what Jake didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I hadn't been trying to be a hero that day in Afghanistan. I was just trying to save my friends. I sat in my beat-up Ford pickup truck in the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, shaking like I was freezing to death, even though it wasn't cold outside. My phone was in my hands, and I was calling the only person in the world who still cared about me. "Maria?" I said when my sister answered. My voice came out all cracked and weird. Tommy? What's wrong? You sound terrible. Maria was 3 years younger than me, but she'd always been the smart one in our family. She had a good job as a nurse at the children's hospital, and she was married to a nice guy named Carlos who treated her right. They had 2 little kids who called me Uncle Tommy and didn't care about my scars. I can't do this anymore, I whispered into the phone. I was trying not to cry, but it wasn't working very well. Can't do what, Tommy? Where are you? I'm at Murphy's Diner. Maria, maybe Jake was right. Maybe I really am just damaged goods. Maybe I should have died over there with the rest of my squad. Don't you dare talk like that, Maria said, and her voice got real sharp. Don't you ever say that again. What happened? Who's Jake? So I told her everything. About running into Jake Martinez from high school. About how he made fun of my scars in front of everyone. About how he called me damaged goods and said people would remember him for being successful while they'd only remember me for being broken. Jake Martinez? Maria said when I was done. Wait, isn't he that kid who used to live on Maple Street? The one with the big mouth who was always bragging about stuff. Yeah, that's him. Except now he really does have stuff to brag about. Nice suit, fancy friends, probably makes more money in a month than I make all year. Tommy, listen to me very carefully, Maria said. Do you remember what really happened that day in Afghanistan? Not the explosion, but what you did after. I closed my eyes and tried to push the memories away like I always did. But Maria wouldn't let me. Tell me what you did, Tommy. Tell me what you did when that bomb went off. Maria, I don't want to talk about it. You saved people, didn't you? You didn't just get hurt and give up. You saved people. The memories came flooding back whether I wanted them to or not. The sound of the explosion that was so loud it felt like the world was ending. The smell of smoke and burning metal. The screaming. I pulled Sergeant Williams out of the truck, I said quietly. He was bleeding real bad from his leg. The bone was sticking out. What else? I dragged him behind some rocks where he'd be safe. Then I went back for Private Chun. He was unconscious, and there was blood coming out of his ears. And then what? Then I went back for Corporal Johnson, but he was already dead. The explosion had. I stopped talking because I didn't want to remember what Corporal Johnson looked like. How long did you stay with Sergeant Williams? Maria asked. Until the medics came. Maybe 40 minutes. I had to keep pressure on his leg to stop the bleeding. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the bandage, but I couldn't let go or he would have died. And Private Chun? He woke up while we were waiting. He was scared and confused, so I talked to him. Told him jokes and stories about home. Kept him calm until help came. I was crying now, but not because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time since I got back from Afghanistan, I was remembering the good parts. The parts where I'd actually help people instead of just getting hurt. Tommy, you saved 2 men's lives that day. 2 fathers went home to their families because of what you did. 2 wives got to hug their husbands again. How many kids got to keep their daddies because you were brave enough to go back into danger? But I couldn't save Johnson, I said. And I couldn't stop the bomb from going off in the first place. You're not Superman, Tommy. You can't save everyone from everything. But you save the ones you could save, and that makes you a hero. I sat there in my truck, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The scars were still there. They'd always be there. But maybe Maria was right. Maybe they weren't marks of shame. Maybe they were proof that I'd done something important. That's when I noticed something that changed everything. In the parking space next to mine was a black BMW with shiny rims and leather seats. Jake's car, but there was something on the back window that made my blood run cold. A small sticker that said Semper Fi with a Marine Corps symbol underneath it. Jake Martinez wasn't just a successful businessman who'd avoided military service. Jake Martinez was a Marine. I stared at that Marine Corps sticker on Jake's BMW like it was a ghost. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I looked up Jake Martinez on social media. What I found made my stomach feel like I was falling off a cliff. The first thing I saw was a picture of Jake in his Marine dress blues. The fancy uniform with all the shiny buttons and ribbons. He looked proud and strong, like every Marine should look. But his eyes looked different than they did today. In the picture, his eyes looked happy and full of hope. I kept scrolling through his Facebook page, and every new picture made me more confused. Jake wasn't just a Marine. He was a decorated Marine. There were photos of him getting medals pinned to his chest. Pictures of him with his unit in some desert that looked a lot like where I'd been in Afghanistan. My hand was shaking so bad, I almost dropped my phone. This couldn't be right. Jake had told everyone in the diner that he'd gotten out of military service by going to college. He'd made fun of me for going to war while he stayed safe at home. But the evidence was right there on my phone screen. There was a post from 8 months ago that said, "Thank you to everyone who came to my retirement ceremony. After 12 years and 3 deployments, it's time to start the next chapter." The picture showed Jake shaking hands with some high-ranking officer while a bunch of other Marines clapped. 3 deployments. That meant Jake had been to war, just like me. Maybe even more times than me. I scrolled down further and found posts about Marine Corps birthdays. Pictures of Jake at veteran events. Check-ins at VA hospitals. This wasn't just someone pretending to be a Marine for attention. This was the real deal. But then I noticed something else. Something that made my heart hurt for Jake, even though he just finished making me feel like garbage. The older posts from when he was still in the Marines were happy. Lots of pictures with his buddies. Jokes about Marine life. Complaints about military food and long training exercises. Normal stuff that any Marine would post. But the newer posts from after he got out were different. The pictures of him in his expensive suits looked fake somehow, like he was trying too hard to smile. And between the posts about his business success, there were weird little comments that didn't make sense. Things like some days are harder than others and missing my brothers and adjustment is tougher than I thought it would be. One post from just 3 weeks ago said, "Went to another buddy's funeral today. That makes 6 this year. Not all wounds are visible." I felt like I was reading about a completely different person than the one who had just humiliated me in the diner. The Jake Martinez on social media was hurting just as much as I was, maybe even more. Then I found the post that explained everything. It was from 6 months ago, and it was longer than his usual posts. It said, "Today marks 1 year since I lost my entire squad in Fallujah. IED took them all in 1 second, and somehow I walked away with just a concussion. Everyone keeps calling me lucky, but I don't feel lucky. I feel guilty. Why did I get to come home when they didn't? Some days I wish I'd died with them." My phone screen got blurry because tears were filling up my eyes. Jake hadn't just been to war. He'd been through the same kind of hell I'd been through. He lost his friends just like I'd lost mine. He was carrying around the same guilt and pain that kept me awake at night. But there was more. The post went on to say, "The hardest part is pretending everything is okay. Everyone expects me to be grateful and happy that I survived. They don't understand that surviving sometimes feels like the worst punishment of all. I put on a suit every morning and pretend to be successful, but inside I'm dying a little more each day." I looked up from my phone and stared at the diner where Jake was probably still sitting with his fancy friends. Now I understood what was happening. Jake wasn't a cruel, successful businessman who'd avoided military service. Jake was a broken veteran just like me, but instead of hiding in his apartment like I did, he was hiding behind a fake life. The expensive suit, the fancy car, the business meeting with his friends, it was all an act. Jake was pretending to be someone he wasn't because he couldn't deal with who he really was. But that still didn't explain why he'd been so mean to me. If he knew what it felt like to be hurt and scared and guilty, why would he make me feel worse? I kept reading his posts, looking for answers. That's when I found something that made everything clear. It was a post from just 2 days ago. It said, "Saw another veteran at the grocery store today. His scars were visible, and I hated him for it. Not because of how he looked, but because he had the courage to show his pain while I hide mine behind lies." I wanted to talk to him, to tell him I understood, but instead I just felt angry at myself for being such a coward. Now I understood. Jake hadn't been cruel to me because he thought he was better than me. He'd been cruel to me because he was jealous of me. Jealous that I could be honest about my scars while he had to pretend his didn't exist. I put my phone away and looked back at the diner. Through the window, I could see Jake still sitting with his friends, but now he was just staring at his coffee cup. His friends were talking and laughing, but Jake looked like he was a million miles away. He looked exactly like I felt most days. I knew what I had to do, even though it scared me more than facing enemy fire in Afghanistan. I took a deep breath and walked back into Murphy's diner. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might explode, but I kept walking toward Jake's table anyway. His fancy friends had left, and he was sitting alone now, staring into an empty coffee cup like it held all the answers to life's problems. Up close, I could see things I'd missed before. His expensive suit was wrinkled like he'd slept in it. His hands were shaking just a little bit, the same way mine shook when I was having a bad day. The dark circles under his eyes looked like they'd been there for months. "Jake," I said quietly as I slid into the booth across from him. He looked up at me with surprise and something that might have been fear. "What are you doing back here, Tommy? I thought you left." "I know about Fallujah," I said. The color drained out of Jake's face like someone had pulled a plug. His coffee cup rattled against the table because his hands started shaking harder. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice came out all weak and shaky. "I know about your 3 deployments. I know about the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. I know about the IED that killed your squad 6 months ago." Jake's eyes got wide, and for a second he looked like a scared little kid instead of a mean businessman. Where did you?" "Facebook," I said. "You posted about it." Jake put his head in his hands and made a sound like he was choking. "I was drunk when I wrote that stuff. I didn't think anyone would actually read it." "Jake, why did you lie to everyone? Why did you pretend you never served?" He looked up at me, and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. "Because it's easier than telling the truth. It's easier than explaining why I can't sleep at night. It's easier than talking about how I watched my best friends die while I didn't get a scratch on me." His voice was getting louder, and Betty was looking over at us with concern. But Jake didn't seem to notice or care. "You want to know the truth, Tommy? The truth is that I'm a coward. My whole squad got blown up, and I walked away like nothing happened. Everyone back home thinks I'm some kind of hero, but I know what I really am." "What happened wasn't your fault," I said. "Wasn't it?" Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "I was the squad leader. It was my job to keep them safe. I should have seen that bomb. I should have taken a different route. I should have done something." I knew exactly how he felt because I'd had the same thoughts about my own squad. The same guilt that ate at you from the inside like a poison. "Jake, you can't blame yourself for something you couldn't control." "Can I?" He wiped his nose with his sleeve, and I realized he was crying now. "Do you know what the worst part is? Everyone expects me to be grateful. 'You're so lucky you survived,' they say. 'You should be happy to be alive.' But I don't feel lucky, Tommy. I feel guilty every single day." His voice cracked on the last word, and I saw him for what he really was. Not a successful businessman, not a cruel bully, just a broken soldier who was hurting just as much as I was. "So I made up this whole fake life," Jake continued. "The business meetings, the success story, the expensive clothes. It's all fake. I spend my disability money on this stuff and pretend I'm living the dream. But really, I'm dying inside." "Then why did you attack me?" I asked. "If you know how it feels to hurt, why did you try to make me hurt too?" Jake looked down at his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet I could barely hear him. "Because when I saw you sitting there with your scars showing, I hated you for it. Not because of how you looked, but because you had something I don't have." "What's that?" "Courage. You had the courage to show your pain. You didn't hide it behind lies and fake success stories. You were honest about what happened to you, and I was jealous of that honesty." Jake looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I've been pretending for so long that I forgot how to be real. When I saw you, I wanted to tell you I understood. I wanted to sit down and talk about what we'd both been through. But instead, I got angry at myself for being such a fake, and I took it out on you." "Jake, I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve what I did to you. You're a real hero, and I'm just a coward hiding behind expensive clothes." I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. "Jake, you're not a coward. You served your country for 12 years. You survived something terrible. You're still here, still fighting, even when it feels impossible. That takes courage too." "Does it?" he asked. "Because most days I don't want to be here anymore. Most days I think my squad would be disappointed in the man I became." That's when I heard something outside that made both of us look toward the window. The sound of motorcycles. Lots of them. And something else that sounded like marching feet. Through the glass, I could see something that took my breath away. Marines. Dozens of them, forming a line in the parking lot outside Murphy's Diner. The sound of heavy boots marching in perfect rhythm made everyone in Murphy's diner stop what they were doing and look out the windows. Jake and I both turned to see what was happening in the parking lot, and what we saw made my heart skip a beat. Marines. Not just a few, but dozens of them lined up in perfect rows like they were getting ready for inspection. Some were young guys who looked like they'd just finished boot camp. Others had gray hair and faces that showed they'd seen a lot of battles. They were wearing all different kinds of clothes, some in their dress blue uniforms, some in camouflage, and some in regular civilian clothes with Marine Corps shirts. "What the hell is going on?" Jake whispered, his face pressed against the window. Betty, the waitress, was standing by the kitchen door with a big smile on her face. She caught me looking at her and walked over to our table. "I called them," she said like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You called who?" I asked. "The Marines. My son Danny is a Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton. When I saw what happened here this morning, I called him and told him the whole story about how that man in the expensive suit was making fun of a wounded veteran." Jake's face went white as a sheet. "You told them about me?" Betty looked confused. "I told them about someone being mean to Tommy here. Danny must have called his friends, and they called their friends. Word spreads fast in the Marine Corps when one of their own needs help." Through the window, I could see more Marines arriving. Some came on motorcycles, some in pickup trucks, and some in regular cars. They were all finding their places in the formation, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "They think I'm a bad guy," Jake said, and his voice sounded scared. "They're here to protect Tommy from me." "Are you?" Betty asked, looking at Jake with sharp eyes. "Are you the bad guy?" Jake looked down at his hands, which were shaking worse than ever. "I don't know anymore. I used to think I was one of the good guys. But good guys don't do what I did this morning." That's when I realized something important. Betty didn't know that Jake was a Marine too. Nobody knew except me. As far as everyone else was concerned, Jake Martinez was just a cruel businessman who had attacked a wounded veteran for no reason. But I knew the truth. Jake wasn't evil. He was just broken like me. He was hurting so bad that he couldn't think straight. He was drowning in his own pain. And when he saw me, he tried to push me down to make himself feel better. "Betty," I said, "there's something you need to know about Jake." "Tommy, don't," Jake said quickly. "Please." "Jake's a Marine too," I said. "He served for 12 years. 3 deployments. He lost his whole squad in Iraq 6 months ago." Betty's mouth dropped open like she'd been slapped. She looked at Jake with completely different eyes now. "Is that true?" she asked. Jake nodded, but didn't look up from his hands. 12 years, 3 deployments, and I came home a coward who attacks other veterans. Not exactly something to be proud of. Outside, I could see a Marine with sergeant stripes walking toward the diner. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with scars on his arms and a face that had seen too much. Behind him were 2 younger Marines carrying an American flag. "They're coming in," I said. Jake looked up with panic in his eyes. "Tommy, I can't face them. When they find out what I did, when they find out what kind of Marine I really am, they'll be ashamed of me." "No, they won't," I said, but I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The door of the diner opened, and the sergeant major walked in. His boots clicked on the floor as he looked around the restaurant. His eyes stopped on me first, taking in my scars and my nervous expression. Then his gaze moved to Jake, who was trying to make himself invisible in the booth. "Which one of you is Tommy Rodriguez?" the sergeant major asked in a voice that commanded respect. "I am," I said, standing up. The sergeant major walked over to our table and stuck out his hand. "Sergeant Major William Hayes, United States Marine Corps. I understand you served with the Army in Afghanistan." "Yes, sir," I said, shaking his hand. "And I understand someone in this diner disrespected you this morning because of wounds you received in combat." I looked down at Jake, who was staring at the table like he wanted to disappear through it. "Yes, sir, but what, son?" "But there's more to the story than what you heard." Sergeant Major Hayes looked at Jake, who was clearly trying not to be noticed. "And who might you be?" Jake finally looked up, and I could see tears in his eyes. "Jake Martinez, sir. Gunnery sergeant, retired. And I'm the one who disrespected Corporal Rodriguez." The sergeant major's eyebrows went up in surprise. "You're a Marine?" Jake said quietly. I don't deserve to call myself a Marine anymore. 12 years of service, I added. 3 combat deployments. Silver Star, Purple Heart. He lost his entire squad in Fallujah 6 months ago. Sergeant Major Hayes was quiet for a long moment, studying both of our faces. The whole diner was silent, except for the sound of more Marines gathering outside. I see, he said finally. Sounds like we've got 2 wounded warriors here, not just one. Jake started crying then, really crying, with his whole body shaking. I'm sorry, he kept saying over and over. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did it. I don't know why I said those things. That's when Sergeant Major Hayes did something I didn't expect. He sat down in the booth next to Jake and put his arm around his shoulders. Son, he said in a gentle voice, do you know how many Marines I've seen come home from war carrying invisible wounds? Do you know how many good Marines I've watched destroy themselves because they couldn't figure out how to deal with what they'd seen and done? Jake shook his head, still crying. Too many, the sergeant major said. Too damn many. And you know what I've learned? Hurting people sometimes hurt other people. It doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. Sergeant Major Hayes stood up and looked out the window at all the Marines gathered in the parking lot. You know what those Marines out there came here to do? To shame me, Jake said, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. No, son. They came here to support a brother who was hurting. When they heard a veteran was being attacked, they dropped everything they were doing and came here to help. That's what Marines do. He turned back to look at both of us. But now I see we've got 2 brothers who need support, not just one. The sergeant major walked to the door and stepped outside. Through the window, I could see him talking to the other Marines, explaining what was really happening. I watched their faces change from anger to understanding as they learned the truth about Jake. One by one, the Marines started walking toward the diner. Not marching like soldiers going to battle, but walking like friends going to help someone who was in trouble. The first Marine through the door was a young corporal who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He walked right up to our table and looked at Jake. Gunny Martinez, he said, is that really you? Jake looked up in surprise. Do I know you? You probably don't remember me, but you saved my life in Ramadi 3 years ago. I was just a scared kid on my first deployment, and I froze up during a firefight. You pulled me behind cover and stayed with me until I could get my head straight. Jake's mouth dropped open. Williams? Little Williams from Texas. Not so little anymore, the young Marine said with a grin. But I never forgot what you did for me that day. When I heard someone was giving you trouble, I had to come. More Marines started coming into the diner. Some of them knew Jake personally, others just knew his reputation. They all had the same message. Jake Martinez was their brother, and brothers stick together no matter what. An older Marine with a prosthetic leg sat down at our table. Gunny, I heard about what happened to your squad in Fallujah. I lost my leg to an IED in the same area 2 months before you got hit. Survivor's guilt is a real thing, brother. It makes you do things that aren't like you. I attacked a fellow veteran, Jake said. I said horrible things to him because of his scars. What kind of Marine does that? The kind who's in pain and doesn't know how to deal with it, another Marine said. The kind who needs his brothers to remind him who he really is. Betty was standing by the kitchen door, crying happy tears as she watched what was happening. She'd called for help for one veteran, but she'd ended up helping 2. A Marine with sergeant stripes looked at both Jake and me. You know what I think? I think both of you have forgotten something important. What's that? I asked. You've forgotten that your worth isn't measured by your scars or your mistakes. It's measured by your service, your sacrifice, and your willingness to keep fighting even when everything seems hopeless. He pointed to my scars. Those marks on your face tell a story of courage. You went into danger to save your brothers, and you paid a price for it. That's not something to be ashamed of. Then he pointed to Jake. And you, Gunny, you're carrying wounds that nobody can see. Invisible wounds that are just as real as visible ones. The fact that you survived when your squad wasn't your fault. It was just bad luck, and survivor's guilt is a normal response to trauma. Sergeant Major Hayes stepped back into the diner. Gentlemen, I want you both to come outside. There's something I want you to see. Jake and I followed him out into the parking lot, where all the Marines had formed a huge circle. In the center of the circle were 2 empty chairs. Sit, the sergeant major said, pointing to the chairs. Jake and I sat down, and suddenly every Marine in that parking lot snapped to attention and saluted us. Not the quick, casual salute you might see in movies, but the real thing. The kind of salute that shows respect and honor. These Marines came here today because they heard a veteran was in trouble. Sergeant Major Hayes announced in a loud voice. What they found were two veterans who were both in trouble. Two brothers who had forgotten their worth. Two warriors who needed to be reminded that they are not alone. He looked directly at Jake. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, your service to this country was honorable and brave. The loss of your squad was a tragedy, but it was not your fault. You are still a Marine, and you will always be our brother. Then he looked at me. Corporal Rodriguez, your sacrifice in Afghanistan saved lives and showed the best of what it means to be a soldier. Your scars are not marks of shame, but badges of honor. One by one, every Marine in that circle came forward to shake our hands and thank us for our service. Some share their own stories of struggle and recovery. Others just wanted us to know that we weren't alone. By the time the last Marine had spoken to us, both Jake and I were crying again. But this time, they weren't tears of pain or shame. They were tears of relief and gratitude. As the Marines began to leave, Jake grabbed my arm. Tommy, I don't know how to make up for what I did to you. You don't have to make up for anything, I said. We're both just trying to figure out how to live with what happened to us. Maybe we can help each other. Jake nodded and wiped his eyes. I'd like that. I'd really like that. The last Marine to leave was Sergeant Major Hayes. Before he got in his car, he came over to us one more time. Remember something, both of you, he said. Healing isn't a straight line. You'll have good days and bad days. But you don't have to face those days alone anymore. You've got each other, and you've got all of us. As I watched him drive away, I realized something had changed inside me. For the first time since I came back from Afghanistan, I didn't feel ashamed of my scars. I didn't feel like a broken-down veteran who couldn't fit into normal society. I felt like what I really was, a Marine's brother, a soldier who had served with honor, and a man who was worthy of respect and friendship. And looking at Jake, I could see that he felt the same way.